wait for 2 more minutes and we'll begin.
方案叫什么来着？叫这个，咱不是加群里边了吗？啊，哎，叫啥来着？570，哎，不是，6803，刘子轩。把那个邮寄账单取消了。邮寄账单开始不是那个电话卡要邮寄账单，然后做地址证明的问题。我刚刚取消的。他用一次就行了吗？后来我发现那些银行卡寄过来的那些信都有地址，那些都能用。申请东西好的需要地址证明。
The groups are finalized. There are 12 groups. There are 2 groups consist of 5 students because there are a total of 50 students right now. And group 1 to 6 will be tutorial group TN1. I have asked Rebecca, the administrative staff, to rearrange your tutorial group. Group 1 to 6 will be TN1. Group 7 to 12 will be TN2. You can refer to the campus, and there's the group list and the tutorial group information there. You check the information to see whether it's correct or not. If you do not have a group, you email me. I think all of you have a group. And please sit next to your group members so that you can discuss about the activities and the questions for the lecture. For recap, conceptual framework. Last lesson, 2 students went behind and asked me about conceptual framework. They seem to have difficulty grasping conceptual framework. And if 2 students have the problem, maybe you also have the problem. I have a recap. Conceptual framework is the overall worldview that the researcher has. It is defined by the values and the perception of the researcher. Researcher has certain ideas about the research question, and it is related to the researcher's experience, belief, knowledge, and from the facet of life of the researcher. It is related to the gender, religious background, family, political, social, academic, and environmental arenas of the researcher. The conceptual framework can explain the decision of the researcher, guide what the researcher notice and don't notice, and the researcher can make the implicit framework explicit. And once explicit, the readers of the report of the research may consider other frameworks and know how to interpret the information. You can use a theory to be the conceptual framework. For example, last lecture we talked about time displacement theory. You can prove or disprove a theory by doing a research, and you can make the implicit conceptual framework explicit in the form of a diagram. Okay, the example we discussed last time. The decision to buy one's home, to own one's home, may be affected by political, economic, social factors. This is what the researcher thinks of political, social, and economic. And he is not talking about cultural factors, not about demographic factors. What the researcher noticed will be political, economic, and social, not other factors. This is the assumption, the worldview of the researcher. The researcher gets these views from his experience, from the literature review that he has done, and this is the diagram he draws to make the conceptual framework explicit. He may neglect other factors, cultural factors, demographic factors, but only look at political, social, and economic. And the diagram can be drawn in different ways. It depends on the researcher's worldview, the values, and the assumption of the researcher. Okay? And you use your creativity to try to make your conceptual framework explicit by drawing a diagram. And based on your conceptual framework, you can devise a few questions in the questionnaire related to political, a few questions related to economic, a few questions in your questionnaire related to social. Okay? Is it clear? Clear? Very clear. If you have any question, you stay behind to ask me, or you email me, because I don't know whether all of you understand. Maybe some understand, some do not understand. You can ask me always. Okay, we continue with today's lecture. Today we talk about conceptualization and operationalization. What is it? Okay, look at this picture. What is it? Anyone can tell me? What is it? National flag, Chinese national flag. And how about if I say that it is a red rectangle with 5 yellow stars? Is it also correct? It is also correct, but we interpret a red rectangle with 5 yellow stars as the national flag. It is our interpretation. We give meaning to the diagram we watch. How about this? What is it? What is it? Anyone can tell me? A Japanese flag? But if I say if it's a white cloth with a red patch, is it also correct? Yes, we give meaning to the cloth, the piece of cloth that we are watching, and we are looking at, and we give meaning to it. We interpret it as the flag of Japan. Pieces of cloth, flags and pieces of cloth do not have inherent meaning, but we give meaning to the flags. What the flags symbolize, we give meaning so that the flag symbolize a country, and the flag have meaning because it motivates. What, how, and why it inspire and motivate. We look at the meaning behind the flag. The flag motivate and inspire people to do certain to act in certain way. And who and when does it inspire and motivate? Researchers look at the social meaning of certain symbols. For example, the national flag. Social researchers are interested in meaning. Pieces of cloth, people give meaning to it and inspire and motivate people to act in certain ways. And social researchers are interested in the social meaning, the meaning that we give to the pieces of cloth we call flag of certain country. More research requires moving from what we sense to meaning. Actually, we only sense a piece of cloth, a white cloth with a red patch. When we give a meaning to it, it is the flag of Japan. Linking the world of physical objects, the pieces of cloth, with the social meaning, flag, national flag, and it is moving from measurement. We look at the measurement, how physical objects lead to social meaning. We look at the measurement. For measurement, there's conceptualization and operationalization. What does this mean? We have it discussed later. Now we watch a video. What is measurement?
It involves recording information about what we observe in the world around us, and then using that information to try to figure out what has happened, is happening, or will happen in the future. If we don't record our observations properly, then it's hard to use these records to make inferences. In this video, I describe the topic of measurement in research design. I'll explain what's involved in formulating a measurement strategy and why this phase of developing a research project matters. Let's begin by reviewing how measurement fits into the larger scheme of conducting scientific research. Science generates and tests theories. A theory is an explanation of how the world works, and it has two parts. It has concepts, which are ways that we describe or categorize people or things around us, and relationships, which are links between concepts. In relationships, we postulate that the presence or absence of one concept will influence the presence or absence of another. Let's try to be more concrete. Religiosity is an example of a concept. It classifies people according to the degree to which religion is central to the way they think and behave. We use the concept of religiosity to classify people into groups, perhaps those who are very invested in religion, those who are mildly invested in it, and those who aren't invested in religion at all. Another example is the concept of criminality. It's a concept in which we categorize people according to the degree to which they are willing to break the law. We use this concept to categorize people as well. We might divide them into people who have a high willingness or tendency to break laws, and those who are unwilling to do so. Theories are concepts linked by relationships. So, for example, we might theorize that the degree to which someone is religious affects the degree to which they're criminal. If the relationship between religiosity and criminality is negative, in other words, as one becomes more religious, one becomes less criminal, then we'd expect religious people to be less likely to break the law, and non-religious people to be more likely to break the law.
Now, a theory without evidence is little more than a guess. It's not scientific. To test this theory scientifically, we have to find a way to figure out who's more or less religious and who's more or less criminal, and then see if the people who are more religious are less criminal and the people who are less religious are more criminal.
This recording process is called measurement. When we measure, we keep records of our subjects' thoughts, behaviors, or personal characteristics. We look for relationships between these measurements to see if relationships exist. So in this particular example, developing a measurement scheme involves figuring out a way to determine whether or not someone is more or less religious and more or less criminal. How could we do it? If we were conducting this study using a survey, which is not necessarily the best way to do it, we might ask our respondents directly, are you religious or are you criminal? The problem with asking questions directly is that people might have an inaccurate view of themselves. They might over or underestimate the degree to which they're religious, and they would probably underestimate the degree to which they're criminal. If we wanted to get around this problem, we might ask people to report events in their past instead of making global assessments of their character or lifestyle. For example, instead of asking how religious are you, we might ask how often do you attend religious services, and assume that people who go to religious services more often are more religious. Likewise, instead of asking, are you a criminal, we might ask, how often have you been arrested, or have you ever been arrested, and presume that people who've been arrested are more criminal. Now, these strategies have weaknesses of their own, and all strategies that collect information like this through surveys have to deal with the problem that respondents might report inaccurate information. They might lie, or they might have personally distorted information in their own minds and are conveying that distorted worldview back to you. We could use other types of questions, or we might use a different method for collecting data. For example, I might go visit some staunchly pro and anti-religion people and have extended discussions with them. I could take detailed and extensive notes which try to capture the many things that were said or things that I saw that could help me put together a larger picture of the complex relationship between religion and criminality. Pitfalls here are that it would be hard for someone else to check my work, and there'd be lingering questions about whether or not I was seeing my subjects as they really were, or looking at them in a way that more strongly reflects my personal biases than what these people objectively think or do.
Whether we're talking about survey questions and quantitative research or note-taking strategies and qualitative research, researchers have to figure out a way that they're going to take information about what they observe and put them into records. This process of record-taking, classification, is known as a measurement strategy. My main point in this video is that measurement is not simple. Often, when students get a research project, they think that they have a pretty good handle on the questions that they want to ask, and they go right to drafting up a survey, and then come up to me and ask if they can start collecting data. Running through that process is dangerous. There are lots of pitfalls that you can fall into when you're developing a measurement strategy. So it's important that you do it carefully and with a cognizance of the strengths and the weaknesses of the method that you choose.
Okay, in research, we need to define certain terms. For example, religiosity. What do you mean by religiosity? And how are you going to measure religiosity? For example, in the video it says whether you go to church or go to religious events, how often you go to religious events or in religious gathering. It is an indicator used to show religiosity. Conceptualization is translating ambiguous ideas to precise and clearly defined terms. Conceptualization is to define terms in your research. You give a conceptual definition, the exact logical definition of a concept. I give an example here, conceptual definition of technology identity. It includes 4 areas of individual's belief system. One is one's technology skills, one's skills in using technology. The second is the opportunities and constraints to use technology. Number 3 is the importance of technology. And number 4 is the motivation to learn technology. And you try to define certain terms in your research, and in this research, the researcher tried to define technology identity, and he has 4 dimensions to characterize technology identity. Another example, this is related to my research, look and learn. Broader definition of the term political engagement involves 3 levels. The definition of the term political engagement has 3 levels. Cognitive awareness level, the first level, that is being informed about political and public affairs. The second level is expression level. Expression level has 2 sub-levels. The first sub-level is express political views to immediate circles, family members, colleagues. The second level, sub-level, is to express to wider circle. For example, express views in letter to editor, express views in blogs. There's another level, the third level, action level. Action level has 2 sub-levels, institutional level. That means, for example, voting, writing complaint letter to official participate in government consultative meeting. And another level is non-institutional. Non-institutional has 2 more sub-levels, participation, go to demonstrations, strikes, sign petitions. The second level is mobilization. Organizing demonstrations, sit-ins, mobilizing people in support for a cause. In this research, Jung and Leung 214, it defined political engagement as having different levels. Cognitive awareness level, expression level, and action level. And different levels have different sub-levels. A clear definition of the term. What do you mean by political engagement? And in your research, you also need to define certain concepts and certain terms. And operationalization is that you try to find indicators of certain concepts. In the research, it tried to show it is related to smoking identities and behavior. The key concept is smoking status, whether you are a current smoker or not. The measurement is within last 30 days on how many days did you use cigarettes. The dividing line is 30 days. It is arbitrary. days, 60 days. But you can also refer to government policy or international standard to define whether you use 30 days, 60 days, or 20 days. If you have never used or have used but not in the last 30 days, you are not considered a current smoker. But if you have smoked for 1 or 2 days, 10 to 19 days, 20 to 30 days, within the last 30 days, you are a current smoker. That means you use 30 days to define whether you are a current smoker or you are not a current smoker. And 30 days is something arbitrary. This dividing line can be set with reference to government policy, to international standard. And if there's no government policy, no international standard, maybe you set a reasonable dividing line, and 30 days may be reasonable. And in setting the dividing line of 30 days, you define what is the indicator of smoking status. Another example, self-described smoking identity. Which of the following best describe you? There are some choices: non-smoker, smoker, occasional smoker. That means sometimes you smoke, or social smoker. You smoke in social occasions. Each of these choices is the operationalization of self-described identity. It's an indicator of the self-described identity. If you choose non-smoker, it indicates that you do not smoke or never smoked before. It is an indicator of self-described identity. This is operationalization. Conceptualization is to define a term. Operationalization is to find indicator of the term. Operationalization is the process of deciding what particular data will indicate the presence of a particular concept. For example, you smoke within 30 days, you are a current smoker. The indicator is whether you smoke within the last 30 days. Operationalization. Operal definition is the definition of a concept in terms of what we measure in the physical world. 30 days is used as an indicator of whether you are a current smoker or not. It is operationalization, find indicator of certain concept. When we are doing operationalization, we try to tell what we are actually measuring, and what we actually measure needs to correspond to the concept. We measure exactly what we say we are measuring. Because, for example, we measure whether you're a current smoker. We use 30 days as the dividing line. We measure whether you smoke or not. And we only measure what we say we are measuring. We only measure whether you smoke or not. We do not measure whether you buy cigarettes or not. We only measure whether you smoke or not. In social science, the concepts are difficult to conceptualize and operationalize. There's no one right way to do it. There are different ways to do it, but you need to be reasonable, and you can convince others that you are using the appropriate indicator of certain concepts. You cannot expect perfect measurement. For measurement, we talk about reliability. A measure yields a consistent result. For example, we use a scale, a balance, to measure how much a rock weighs. It is a reasonably reliable measurement of the weight of the rock if you use a scale or a balance to measure the weight. The rock will weigh the same today, tomorrow, and next week if we use the same balance. But in social science, there's a time factor. For example, in the past, we considered squatter huts as bad housing. But now in Hong Kong, we consider subdivided units as split housing. Subdivided unit in the past may be considered quite acceptable, but nowadays it is not acceptable in Hong Kong. The same phenomena, same level, it should score the same if your measuring scale is appropriate and reasonable. For example, students with similar ability and effort will score the same marks in the assessment in the same test. Then it may be a reasonable measure, reasonable indicator of students' performance. We try to have a reasonable indicator of certain concepts, and the indicator may be reliable measurement of certain concepts. The measurement should also be valid. A measure tracks what you think it is measuring. If you measure the rock, the weight of the rock, you use a scale, a balance. You do not use a scale to measure the shape and the texture of the rock. If you measure the weight, you use a balance, a scale. For example, if you try to measure the age of a person, you have a question: how old are you? As the measurement, a valid measurement of the age. But how old are you can measure the age, but not what is, in your opinion, is the proper role of military and foreign affairs. This is not a valid reflection of age. It is asking something that is different from age. If you want to ask age, you use how old are you as the indicator of finding the age of a person, but not asking about military and foreign affairs. This will be a poor measure of age with low validity. Okay, you discuss with your group on question 1 and 2 on the worksheet 1. And we'll discuss later.
Discuss.
Go to Canvas and download the worksheet. Can you find the worksheet?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, discuss with your group member. Question 1 and question 2, and I'll ask different groups to share with us your views. Because most of you have come to Hong Kong and it's available for face-to-face lessons, the classroom is not big enough and there are not many people on Zoom. Maybe next time we need to have a roster, a time schedule. For example, the A groups come for face-to-face and the B groups come on Zoom. And next week, the week following, we have B group coming to face-to-face and A group come on Zoom. Okay, I'll send an email later about how we are going to have the time schedule, the roster.
这问题看了吗？已经啊？看我都已经准备好了。哎呦我去！图书馆蹲了1天了已经。
第一个问题是，
第一个叫什么呀 ？Motherhood 跟那个叫什么
第一个题
就是先定义了一下，一个是什么是母性，什么是母性，一个就是一个是母性，一个是家庭生活。母性就是照顾孩子，家庭生活就是照顾孩子之外的家庭。然后他下面就问你，我帮这孩子去给他去换，给他洗澡啊，给他干啥的呀？偷听问图中专业。然后就是他问，我这么去照顾这个孩子，那他是属于这个母性，还是说这个家庭生活？这个是母性嘛，为了照顾孩子嘛。然后第二个问题是，这个问题没法从字面例子去，它有点偏，说是否有家庭而没有母性，还是说他说的是这篇文章里边啊？就是说他说的这个照顾孩子这个活动，是不是就没有这个家庭的这个东西了，这概念了？第二题不是特别没理解太清楚。是啊。女士方面，这还为孩子呢？
女士的行为是属于那个motherhood。
对 motherhood 还是？对。对呀。
是不包括 take care of。
对。我感觉可以说为啥这么简单？第一个问题确实简单，确实是从定义来看就是属于那个 motherhood。但是第二个问题，这怎么理解这个？他是说的是照顾孩子是否照顾孩子的活动当中是否有涉及到这个家庭生活，还是说我是不是要举一个其他例子？那么它不属于这个 motherhood， 但是又属于这个家庭，是这意思吗？这两种意思。不知道他不知道他的第二问这是想要问什么？
就是母亲的身份和家庭生活是分开的。
对，他那个 A 楼，
是家庭。
12多，也快了吧？不是12，就是他会不会倒着问？
他这个
上的正着问的吗？
母亲的身份去进行的，还是以一个家庭生活去进行？
对啊，就是这个第一问很明显，第二问这个
因为
比较模糊。
睡觉、唱歌，这个一个是从那个物质上、生理上也都去照顾了这个孩子。
还有喂
他可能是不是第二问是为了让你举个例子说明哪些是不属于这个 motherhood 的，但是同样属于家庭生活。
这么深又不起的东西。
这个人给这个下的定义就是母亲就是包括照顾孩子，但是那个家庭生活只是说我在家里生活，我做家务，不包括照顾孩子，就是照顾孩子和家庭生活是分开的。我总觉得这是丁克人的思想。
根据研究员 Sarah 的，就感觉对女性很不尊重的，他把养孩子算不算？
不是，他的意思是把母亲的身份和家庭生活分开的。
是吧？怎么样？有结果了吗？
他们两个是有交集的，家庭的一部分。
谁有交集？1、2跟2。
不是，
就是 motherhood 跟那个。
这个问题主要是母亲的身份。
但是他又说那个那个后边那里边又不含照顾孩子。有交集。
对，应该不包括家。我这么理解。家庭里面肯定还有父亲的照顾。对。
那个 motherhood 是有 physical。是包含 physical activity， 那 A 就主要单纯的 motherhood， domesticity 它也是包含所有的 physical， 然后 B 体。
所有的 physical， 但是后边来说是不含孩子。
身份是应该干的，
不含照顾孩子，
并没有说父亲不该干。
那这是语言的问题了。
我翻译过来理解的就是说，
那还是有交集，那就是这是第二个问题，这是第二个问题。 是这意思吗？就 B 吗？就是 B 吗？
它的定义是不是说明家庭生活可以没有母亲身份这一个情况？是这么一个的吧？因为他如果没有孩子，就等于没有母亲的身份，对吧？
但是 Sarah 的话区分这两个。
对，没有孩子就没有母亲的身份，我只是家庭成员。
那如果她的老公就像个形式，这个
要不要写一下啊？因为谁我是英语，咱谁一会儿燕琪讲，一会儿你讲。咱们这里就有一个。
哦，还有第二个问题。
我们把答案给你准备好了，然后你来解释，你来回答就好。
现在这个就都这么硬了是吧？
答案就我们这儿回答。就一份就一份。
然后第二个问题就是说，他
对术语的定义是否公平？
对失业的定义。
人口包括
第一个就是没有在过去7天内
第一个问题就是
没有获得任何收入。第二个就是
是
没有获得有效的工作。
在查点前7天内也没有从任何有偿。
是啊，在对，这个
这是问题还是第一个问题？
没有有效的工作，我认为 B 是。然后 C 是就是在过去30天都在找工作，没有找到。
就是他问他这个照顾孩子的行为是属于 motherhood 还是属于这个
B 是啥
？B 是就是说我觉得就是在过去的7天内没有有效的工作。
那就有无效的工作。
就是可能没有赚到钱。第一个。
好了，该第二题了，第一题可以了。
我觉得可能是没有。没有，我认为可能是没有赚到钱。是这种。但是我觉得那和第一个是不是又有点冲突？
第一个是没有赚到钱，第二个
所以说这是第一个叫什么？
对，比如说1天临时工。
就是那个，然后
找工但是没找着。
30天一直在找工作，找不到。只是不受保障的说法。调查问卷。就是涉及这个问题，他们回答出来问题，我们能
对，就是这些孩子无关的嘛，孩子无关的。对，打扫卫生，搬搬家具，这不都是跟孩子无关的？
所以说，问题是有技术的。
他在家里照顾孩子，他去收拾时间是够他的。
第一题可以了吗？咱们马上第二个问题。第二个问题还好理解一点。第二个问题就是告诉你政府怎么定义这个失业人口，然后让去设计一个这个调查问卷。就针对他那个3个标准，然后做一个调查问卷嘛。
要不要去？
其实就还加个意思就完了嘛。
会找工作，但是他应该是让找到，只是区分他们有没有工作，
是这意思吗？
身份不身份的工作。
他不是哪个？说是否调查前7天内可以工作？
老师就无语了。
就这个是不是没工作？是不是可以工作？这个是不是30天内都没有
Okay,
工
are you
作？
ready? We discuss about question 1. Group 10.
我去，
How about 1A? Where's group 10?
赶紧看第二题。
This device questions
Because according to the definition,
但是还有
doing a lot of activities to take care of
this
it.
device
So I think it's not
你不是写了吗？
Okay, yes, it is motherhood, taking care of children. This is a
啊，对，都发群里了，
take
发群
care
里
of
了。
the 3-month-old baby. Do a lot of activities. Spending a lot of time talking to her baby every day, thinking of that this may help her help the baby to learn talking, feed the baby, change napkin, bathe him. It is related to motherhood. In the research, you try to define certain terms, and this researcher defined motherhood as different from domesticity. And according to the definition, Mrs. A will be doing activities related to motherhood. 1B, look 11, where are you? What's your answer? Look 11, where are you?
So our answer is that yes, there can be, because actually in terms of this definition, domesticity are those things managing a household but excluding the care of children. So things like house cleaning or paying the electricity or something that is within the sense of managing a household but not care about children. Those things are all in the definition of domesticity, in the definition of Sarah Oren.
Yes, domesticity can exist without motherhood. You can do household chores without caring children. Okay? In a research, you try to define certain terms and you try to be consistent in the application of the terms throughout the research.
你读它就行。
Okay, question 2. I have some suggested answer. Possible answer for question 2. For the first, you need to measure the age. For measurement of the age, how old are you? Below 15 years old or 15 years or above? Because one of the definition of whether you are unemployed, you should be age 15 or above. The next, you aim at measuring whether have a job or whether have performed any work for pay or profit during 7 days before enumeration. Have a job is the same as having performed any work for pay. These two overlap. The measurement, maybe you ask, have you performed any work for pay or profit during the past 7 days? Yes or no? Then you aim to measure whether have been available for work during the 7 days before enumeration. The measurement is that were you available for work during the past 7 days? Yes or no? Then you aim at measuring whether have sought work during the 30 days before enumeration. The measurement will be that you try to seek work during the past 30 days, yes or no? Then you combine the 4 questions. How old you are? If you are 15 years old or above, have you performed any work for pay or profit during the past 7 days? No. Were you available for work during the past 7 days? Yes. Did you try to seek work during the past 7 days? Yes. Or the combined red answer may be the unemployed people defined by the Census and Statistics Department. Okay? You divide into certain questions to measure different dimensions, and the answers add up together is your definition. Okay, we continue.
哎，没事了。那就下一个问题了是吧？
We have talked about possible answer for worksheet 1. We talk about the concept of variables and hypotheses. variable is a characteristic that varies from one unit of analysis to another, or one unit of analysis over time. For example, the unit of analysis is the student in this class. The gender there may be two options, female or male. For each student in this class, you may have the option of male or female. The gender is the variable. The unit of analysis is the student of this class. You have two variables, two options, two categories, female or male. The variable is gender. Or the variable may be crime rate. The unit of analysis is city. The crime rate of Hong Kong may be 5,200.1 crimes per 100,000 people. The variable is crime rate. There may have been different values. For Hong Kong, maybe 5,207. For Shenzhen, maybe 2,500 per 100,000 people. For Beijing, it's different, maybe 3,000 per 100,000 people. The crime rate is the variable. The unit of analysis may be in the city. There may be different values for crime rate. For hypothesis, it's a testable statement about two or more variables, how they are expected to relate to each other. There's an example here. People who have performed voluntary roles before retirement will be more likely to perform such roles after retirement than people who have not performed such roles. The variable is whether you have performed voluntary work before retirement, and see how it is related to another variable, whether they perform voluntary work after retirement. The relation is between two variables. One variable is whether you perform voluntary work before retirement. The other variable is whether you perform voluntary work after retirement. And it is expected that the two variables are related. There are links between two variable characteristics of an individual, but it is not absolute certainty, only tells about tendency. If you tend to perform voluntary work before retirement, you tend more to perform voluntary work after retirement. It's a tendency, but it is not an absolute certainty. There may be exceptions to the general situation. The dependent variable is a variable that the researchers see as being affected by another variable. Dependent variable, depending on others. Independent variable is affecting and influencing another variable. I give an example here. Gender will affect the level of self-esteem of a person. Gender is the independent variable. It is independent of others. It affects others. The level of self-esteem is the dependent variable. It is dependent on gender. The control variable may be held constant, for example, income, job, educational level. Given the same educational level, gender, for example, women, they have less self-esteem. The dependent variable may be the level of self-esteem. Gender is the independent variable. Control variable control the job, the income, and the educational level. I'll give you some time to read over this slide and discuss with your friend if you have some questions. Dependent variable, independent variable, and control variable.
他要讨论什么控制变量？
不是讨论这少概念，控制变量必须保持不变的。
Okay, gender affects the level of self-esteem. Self-esteem is dependent on the variable gender. Gender is the independent variable. The control variable may be income, job, educational level. Given the same job, same income, same educational level, member of certain gender may have lower self-esteem. Maybe women have lower self-esteem, even given the same income, job, and educational level. Okay, we continue. We have another example, the relation between ice cream sales and price. The sales of ice cream is the dependent variable. The price is the independent variable. The price affects the sales of ice cream. The higher the price, the lower the sales of ice cream. The independent variable is the price. The dependent variable is the sales of ice cream. The control variable is the temperature of that day. Given the same temperature, the higher the price, the lower will be the sale of ice cream, and vice versa. Give you some time to read this slide and discuss with your friend if you have questions.
讨论，就是两因素是吧？两因素看它的相关关系嘛，就是要保持其他的因素是稳定的。这太帅了。这是经济学里边这是，是吧？数学有，需求的那个，对啊，就是保持其他稳定的情况下，
价格是自变量，自己确定。
供给曲线、需求曲线，均衡价格。
但是价格的变化会影响销售。
后面呢？
Any questions? We control the temperature of the day because if it is hotter, the sale of ice cream may increase no matter the price, how high or low the price. So therefore we control the temperature of the day. Okay, we discuss about sampling and data collection, qualitative. Sampling in everyday life. A mother is preparing soup in a pot in the kitchen. She would like to know whether the soup is salty or enough. What can she do? Discuss with your group. What can she do?
可以问人，他会问几个味道怎么样？
有测量吗？一锅水放多少盐？
Taste a little bit. Yeah, taste a little bit.
测一
This
下
is everyday sampling.
盐度
We
计
taste
测
a
一下。
little bit. We do not drink the whole pot of soup to see whether it's salty enough. We take a little bit. The next question. My mouse is not working. If a mother buys a new brand of pizza home, she would like to know whether this brand tastes good or not. If not, she would need to cook some spaghetti for her children since they may not like to eat the pizza. What can she do?
准备一些意大利面吗？准备一些意大利面吗？联合准备吗？
Any idea?
对啊，
Discuss.
问的话，他孩子也不一定喜欢吃，别的孩子喜欢吃，但我孩子不喜欢吃。那我这时候我就准备好意大利面吧。
那你就两样都吃嘛。这么麻烦。
这是好的，
对啊。
这是最好方法。
有点。对啊，都。Pizza and spaghetti together.
Or she allows the child to taste a little bit of pizza to see whether it's like you like it or not, you like it or not.
哎呀，这都
Okay,
洗脑了。
everyday sampling.
小孩子才做选择，大人都要。
Okay, in everyday life, we also do everyday sampling. And in doing research, we also do sampling. All sampling involves making a judgment about the whole based on the analysis of only a part of the whole. We taste a little bit of soup to see whether it's salty or not. We taste a little bit of pizza to see whether it is tasty or not. Scientific sampling is more careful and systematic than everyday sampling. But in our everyday life, we also do sampling. But it is less systematic when we do sampling as compared to sampling we do in research. Is interviewing the entire group always better than interviewing a sample of the group? Discuss with your group. I asked some of the group to share with us your view.
工作量太大了，这个小组不用多少人了，可以抽样。就是你抽他好几万学生，你都调查过来吗？你抽一部分呗。对，如果群特别小的可以。
Okay, group 12, where are you?
12.
Group 12, where are you?
I think it is not always, because if the population, the number of population is small, we can take the interview to all populations. And if the number of population is big, we can just sampling some part of sample some. We can just sample some.
Do sampling.
Yeah, do some sample.
Okay, it depends on the size of the population. If the population size is big, we do sampling. But when we do sampling, the sampling must be representative so that we do not have distortion of reality. It depends. If the entire group may be too large to handle, it is not feasible to collect information from all members of the population. We need to have a representative sample so that it accurately reflects the target population. And we also can legitimately generalize results from the sample to the population. If it is improperly drawn, the sample is improperly drawn, it will distort the reality. Manageable samples is you can have better trained interviewers, have greater control of the interviewers, and have fewer hard to find respondents, and may have better research carried out than having targeting at the whole population. The population is all possible cases that you are interested in studying consists of people who have some particular characteristic in common. For example, all Hong Kong people, all eligible voters, all school-age children, all City U students. A sample is a subset of individuals from the population. The whole population includes all. The sample is a subset from the target population. We look at the sample to collect information. Okay, we watch your video on sampling.
Simple, convenience, systematic, cluster, and stratified. To find things out about a population of interest, it is common practice to take a sample. A sample is a selection of objects or observations taken from the population of interest. For example, a population might be all apples in an orchard at a given time. We wish to know how big the apples are. We can't measure all of them, so we take a sample of some of them and measure them. The method chosen for taking the sample depends on the nature of the population and the resources available in terms of time and money. The ideal is for each object in the population to be equally likely to be chosen as part of the sample. This is called an unbiased sample. It is also desirable for the sample to be representative of the population. If the population of apples were 2/3 red and 1/3 green, the sample should be similarly split. Note that no matter what we do, there will always be sampling error or variation due to sampling, as we are looking at a part of the population, not the whole population. The video on variation covers these concepts more thoroughly. This video presents 5 methods of sampling: simple random sampling, convenient sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, and stratified sampling. For each method, we will outline the process and the advantages and disadvantages. Simple random sample. Simple random sampling is theoretically the ideal method of sampling. You list each member of the population and use random numbers to decide which objects are in the sample. Each object is equally likely to be selected. This produces an unbiased sample, which we hope is representative. However, it can be difficult and expensive to take a simple random sample when dealing with people. Simple random sampling is more practical when the population is geographically concentrated and when a good sampling frame exists. A sampling frame is a list of all the people or objects in the population of interest. Simple random sampling can be more easily implemented for natural and manufacturing populations. Convenient sample. Convenient sampling is just that, convenient. You ask people nearby or people who walk past at a shopping mall, or you take the next 20 objects off the production line. You do what is easy or convenient. Convenient samples are often biased in some way, but for a quick and cheap poll, it may not really matter. Convenient samples can also have self-selection bias when people choose to participate because they have an interest in the issue in question. Systematic sampling. With systematic sampling, you choose a starting point at random and then systematically take objects at a certain number apart. For example, if there are 1,000 in the population and you want a sample of 50, you would take every 20th object. Systematic samples are easier to administer than simple random samples and are usually a good approximation of a random sample. However, if there is a pattern in the population, certain types of objects could be chosen more or less often than others. Cluster sampling. In cluster sampling, the population is divided into clusters which are then chosen at random. For example, departments of a business can be clusters, or suburbs within a city. Within each cluster, all of the objects are included in the sample. Cluster sampling can be more convenient and practical than simple random sampling. However, if the clusters are different from each other with regard to the elements we are measuring, it can lead to bias or non-representativeness. Stratified sampling. Stratified sampling seems like cluster sampling, but the strata or groups are chosen specifically to represent different characteristics within the population, such as ethnicity, location, age, or occupation. Within each group, a random sample is taken, sometimes in proportion to the size of the group. Stratified sampling can lead to a very good random representative sample. However, it can be complex to administer, and a sampling frame with considerable information about the population is required. There are other sampling methods. The 5 explained here give an idea of the advantages and disadvantages of various methods. You should attempt to use the sampling method that produces the best result for the resources you have available. If your sample has known bias, this should be taken into account in analysis and reporting.
為咗可以有最多嘅時間俾我享。
学粤语。
You have watched a video on sampling. There are probability samples and non-probability samples. Probability samples are each element in the population have the same chance of inclusion in the sample. There are different types of probability sample. One type of probability sample is the simple random sampling. Each element in the population has equal probability of inclusion in the sample. For example, I put all your names into a box. The whole class have 15 students. The population is 50. I then, from the box, pick up 10 names. And then each of you have the same chance of being chosen from the box. It is equal probability of inclusion in the sample, simple random sampling. Another type is systematic sampling, taking every k element listed in the sampling frame and a random starting point in the sampling frame. For example, I put all your names, 50 names, according to alphabetical order, and then give one number to the one starting with A, and then the last have the 50, starting with Z. Okay, and then I pick one random number, 3, and then I choose number 3 on the list, number 13 on the list, number 22, 23 on the list, number 33 on the list, number 43 on the list. This is systematic sampling, the kth element. Every 10th element, I pick it up. I have random starting point. I draw the lot and the number is 3. I start from a random starting point, 3. And then I pick up 13, pick up 23, pick up 33, pick up 43, the kth element, every 10. Systematic sampling. Stratified sampling. Divide the population into smaller subgroups. I divide the whole class into male and female and put it in a box. Male in one box and female in one box. And then from each box I pick up 3 male and 3 female. Draw separate random sample from each strata. The subgroup, the strata may be gender, male and female. You have random sampling from each strata. That means I put it in a box. Everyone has the same chance of being picked up 3 male from one box and 3 female from another box. You need to have random sample from each strata before you can classify it as stratified sampling. Subgroup or the strata may be gender. I put all the males in one class in one box, all the females in another box. And then I pick up 3 from the male box and 3 from the female box. That is stratified sampling. Area sampling or cluster sampling. You divide into cluster. And a random sample of these clusters are selected. All elements in the cluster, in the selected cluster, will be included in the sample. For example, there may be 8,000 streets in Hong Kong. For example, 8,000 streets in Hong Kong. Each cluster may be one street. I put all the 8,000 streets name into the box. And then I pick three streets out of the box. And then the 3 streets include a lot of households. I interview all households in the 3 streets that are drawn from the box. That is cluster sampling. The sample of the cluster are randomly selected. You put it in the box and then pick it up. All have the same chance of being picked up. And the cluster being selected, all elements in the cluster will be included in the sample. For example, I pick up 3 streets. All households in the streets will be included in the sample, in the 3 streets that I have picked up from the box. There's non-probability sample. Non-probability sample is the probability of each element being included in the sample is not known. It doesn't mean that all elements have the same chance of being included in the same sample. There's no claim of representativeness. And you cannot infer from the sample to the general population. You cannot generalize to the whole population. Usually it is using qualitative research. non-probability sample, for example, convenience sample. You take whichever element is readily available or convenient. For example, you ask your friends, or you ask teachers, doctors, social workers, self-help groups to refer single father for interview. There may be certain bias if you use referrals from teachers, doctors. For example, the single father's children may have some academic problem. That's why the single father is in touch with the teachers, and the teachers refer the single father for interview by the researcher. Or the single parent father, single father's children has medical problem, and the doctors are getting in touch with this single father and refer the case. There may be certain bias for convenience sampling case. Or you ask your friends to fill in the questionnaire. There may be certain bias. For example, you may have friends of your age group from the same city, or usually of the same sex. The sampling may be biased for convenience sampling. Snowball sampling. You start with a few cases of the type you want to study. These cases then introduce us to more cases and so on. For gay people, it is difficult to interview or ask them to fill in questionnaire. For example, you have a friend that you know is gay. You interview that gay friend. After interviewing that gay friend, you ask the gay friend to refer you to 3 more cases of gay people for interview, and then you interview them, and then you also ask them to refer 3 more cases. The ball gets bigger and bigger. This is snowball sampling. You start with a few cases and then ask them to refer you to further cases, and you carry on. The ball gets bigger and bigger. Snowball sampling. Dimensional sampling. You try to enhance the representativeness, though it is non-probability sampling. You try to specify all important dimensions or variables. For example, you want to do a research concerning officials in Hong Kong. You have the dimension: high ranking, middle ranking, low ranking, or discipline services official. In each high ranking official, you have 1 male and 1 female. Middle ranking, 1 male and 1 female. Low ranking, 1 male and 1 female. Discipline service, 1 male and 1 female. The 2 important dimensions is the type of official and the gender of the official. And for each combination of the dimension, you have 1 case for interview or for participant in your research. At least 1 case that represents each possible combination of dimensions. Quota sampling. You specify certain quota, certain number of members of different subgroups are included. For example, you have a quota of 10 men and 10 women at health clinic. You go to the health clinic and accept the first 10 in each group who agree to participate in the interview, so that it is not biased. Then it will not be all men or all women. Then maybe there are 10 men and 10 women as participants. Judgmental sampling, purposive sampling. That means you target those you think that are important for your research. You make a judgment, you make a purposive sampling. For example, you aim at understanding why some primary schools are successful, and successful is measured by high student score. And you make a judgment. You judge that schools with 5 highest scores are important for your research. Yet you interview the principals. You make a judgment who are important for your research, and you target those important people as participants. Okay, work on worksheet 2 of your that can be downloaded from campus. Worksheet 2. Discuss with your group members on the worksheet.
第一个对随机抽样，那这儿还用不用给他解释解释吗？就直接来一个随机抽样就完了。第二个是 snow， 同性恋接受同性恋嘛，就是 snowball 嘛。第三个呢就是那个分组，对，就维度的那个 dimensional。但是第四个有点模糊，第四个算什么呀？他是先给他分成2个组，然后再根据每个组的邀请他的朋友。
不是，就是你这个对。
对啊，前面都比较明确，就是第4个。
第二个就是那个 snowball。
convenience 是什么呀
？convenience 是方便。
一个随机，
这就在他的同时和那个朋友那里
邀请他们加入活动。难道是最后一个 Judgmental？ 因为他这个都是按顺序来的嘛。连顺序最后的话，就是那2个了。
不是snowball，
判断抽样。
雪球
要确保包含不同人口亚群的
雪球，找到1个人就找到了50个人。snowball， 在这就选 snowball 3。
雪球的像是 convenience， 我觉得像是 convenience。
convenience 方便抽样。取任何现场方便的元素。
不是吗？
也方便是吧？反正邀请他的那个朋友同学。
愿意加入。
反正就是这个比较模糊，这是第4一个。
反正肯定是浓厚。我这个题。
对。
接受。
因为他先分2个小组吧。
也有点像fold。
对啊，他分男女，然后再去。出题问题。是吧？你俩觉得前面3个都没问题是吧？第4个有点模糊。
其实最后2个都是
综合，它是叫什么 ？combine 综合。抽奖。
对，
抽一个。随机是吧？ 随机抽一个。
理解这个 dimensional sample 啥意思？
那你说 C 应该是这个 dimensional，
对，要两缸抽样。
风多随多。
量缸6是百度翻译过来的。
几点前后？
这种术语应该是
460。
或者叫多维。多维度。
柯南画的
职位
对，前面这里前面就是 convenience， 这个后面是
最后一个应该是 convenient。因为他找的是自己朋友最方便的人。
这个有些蒙口人。
很方便。
第二个不是。
哎，看看老师做的就。
但是第二个他那个找到了一个发散到好几个。他要没发散的就方便选，但发散了。
又开始，行，难过了。
我们应该回答第4个。我们应该回答第4个是吧？还有什么？他们也说了。
Okay, question B. Okay, question A, 1A, simple random sampling. Okay, good. 1B, group 2, where are you? Group 2, where are you? Okay, good. B is no more sampling. Because the ball gets bigger and bigger, get referrals. And 1C, group 3, where are you? Yes, good, dimensional sampling. Dimension, maybe the house centennial and the gender, the sex. You have 2 cases from each combination. Group 4, number D. Number 4, where?
Yeah. I think it's convenient sampling.
Yes, it's convenient sampling. You invite friends, classmates, relatives to the focus group. Okay?
不然套路出牌这个。
You understand sampling?
我刚才想到是不是这个取样 Stratified？
那可能就是方便，都认识了，方便。
Is random sampling sample always better than non-probability sampling for sample convenience sample or snowball sampling? Discuss with your group member. Is random sample always better than non-probability sample?
Always.
C
也不一定吧，看你要做什么。
概率取样。
Okay, group 5, where are you? Group 5. Any answer?
他这个意思是说的那个随机取样是不是都比那个非概率取样好？找到一会儿然后发散。
就跟那个 gay 似的，你 gay 去随机啊，那没用，对吧？
Okay, now you think it's no, but you do not, you are not clear about the reason. Okay, for doing random sampling, you need to know all those in the population, but some people, some research, you do not all know all in the population. For example, they may have hidden identity. For some gay people, you do not know all gay people in Hong Kong. You do not know the sampling frame. And you cannot do a simple random sampling. And in this case, you need to have non-probability sampling. non-probability sampling is necessary when the population is hidden. For example, gay people, for example, drug users. You do not know all drug users in Hong Kong. You do not know all gay people in Hong Kong. You do not have a completeness of all elements in the population. They are hidden. They hide themselves from detection, from researchers and others. For example, those who use drugs, gay people. If you cannot do simple random sampling and you do not do the research. If nothing is done, no research is done. No research is done on the hidden population. Nothing will know about them will be known. If no research is done, nothing can help to improve the society related to the disadvantaged group. That's why if we cannot have simple random sampling, we still do the research. We do non-probability sampling. We have snowball sampling. Start with a few gay friends and ask them to refer to use further cases so that the research can be done. But we need to have care about the population, about the research findings. We use the research findings with care if it is non-probability sampling. It still reflects part of the reality, but we cannot generalize into the entire population. For example, you start with a few friends who are gay and refer you to certain cases. They are in the same network. They may share certain characteristics. For example, they may be all middle class, or they may be knowing each other rather than in another network. And we need to read the research findings with care, but we still do the research so that some reality is known about the hidden population. Okay, we have a break for 10 minutes, come back at 3:40, and then we continue.
Break. Break. 啊，那东西还在内地呢，还在住。这玩意儿他27号不就得交那个第一题了？那他这供拿着了。那这玩意儿就得视频聊。哎呀！哎呀，这，我看你晒的这黑的，真的黑了吗？到现在浑身上下哪儿都疼，不知道这周还敢不敢爬了。要即便爬也是找一个，就是难度没那么大的爬。
不爬直接烧鹅。
直接烧鹅也行，直接烧鹅也行。不是烧鹅也行。隔壁那个狮子山。
地下山。
啊，地下山。
不是挑战100公里吗
？100公里得循序渐进的，这16公里不是上面18公里没跑完。确实，现在从脚底到上面到肚子这儿，有点抽筋了。主要是他刚开始一去了就去的那个寒坡，直接就全废了。上去寒坡没人敢动了。啊？写错了。这个老师不是给那个什么吗？给指导具体的方向吗？更明确了一点。然后老师让继续去读文献。那个问题27号吗？是选一个吗？还是都选？还是都选？选其中一个。我都可以啊，我都可以。
另外一个人，
我看不是，我以为是写3个呢。
他是钉钉。
啊？
那个人还是钉钉。
对呀、我看看那个是，哎，你们切完了？现在？是几个题？是写一个还是写一个？签到多钱吗？1600。从哪儿呢？穿一圈儿。我看看这个 outline。选题谁？GD 哪儿去了？对啊，对象文章之一进行，就2个题嘛，是吧？一健康为大家提供住房，探索贫困家庭住房利益策略。不翻译看不懂。在香港打击非法建筑。这俩好像都比较抽，二选一。你觉得你比较熟哪个呀？我看都比较抽象。一会好一点，就接触的应该更贴近一点，生活。都可以。就是第二是什么呀？第二他说是在香港打击非法建筑，什么德尔福政策研究，其实打不击违建吗？这是。宣传权，对啊，就是违建嘛，就是违法建筑嘛，就违建。宣传权在内地是特别多，在香港我还不太了解香港的宣传权，香港的这种非法建筑都是以香港为基础吗？那第一个，然后那个咱们27号要提交要出东西，还有2周。
看一下，我看一下
那1500字啊，对呀。
就写完自己讲什么都是对的就可以
了。先熟悉呗，然后咱们预计还2周嘛，就1周先11周之后碰一下，然后那个下周再写，是吧？对，先看一下，先看完然后交流一下想法什么的，不然的话直接写咱俩你把我把它放一块儿，它不是一个事儿，可能是。对，然后下次碰一下，然后再写，也可以现写嘛，对。2周时间也够了。这地方后边还有好多，对，还有好多其他的作业呀，对。然后下周你看下周。
抽筋了，我
行呗。
10月份有作业。
好的，我记上点，我怕我忘了，我得记上，不记上可能就忘了。我从那日历里边记上。周2，下周2之前。下周2之前。下周1。
现在只知道9月27号要交的东西。
6。POL6803-Lecture3。
我们要讨论的东西吧。正好有一个95分钟的外部编制。这个应该是一个组吗？
一个组吧，一个人
讲点啥？
讨论的时候你们怎么着？我本来是想放弃的，也不能说不能放弃。
是不是5个 CK？
Have you all signed this attendance sheet?
就是。
Where's the attendance sheet? There's some students haven't signed it.
我咋记得还有个95分？
哎，你这都被切在这边，哪跑了？ 这回让我们旷课呀。
Remember to give feedback to attendance sheet before you leave the classroom.
已经飞了这个。
10月20号。
Okay, we continue. Data collection and quantitative fields. We focus on qualitative data collection first. Effective in-depth interview. In-depth interview is a qualitative data collection method. When you start the interview, you find a physical condition that is quiet, comfortable, without distraction. And then you can safeguard confidentiality. If it is too close to others, what the interviewing talk about maybe can be listened by others. You find a quiet place where there can be confidentiality. The seating arrangement, maybe face to face, not too close, allow some kind of eye contact. The interview starts with introduction to introduce the study clearly, what is it for and what is the status, and you ensure confidentiality in the interview when you start the interview. During the interview, the first question or first few questions are easy to answer questions. That is warm-up question. Ask question that is easy to answer. Do not threaten the interviewee. Be an attentive listener and be empathetic and remain neutral. And do not be show great response. For example, when the interviewee said that I'm gay, and then you have a great response. Oh, you are gay. You have a great response. Then it will irritate the interviewee. Be neutral and control yourself. Okay? Use gentle non-verbal nods, verbal, to show that your interest and you understand the interviewee. Make sure that the interviewee is doing most of the talking. Do not do a lot of talking as an interviewer. Use prompts and follow-up questions. For example, the interviewee gives certain answers. You follow up. Can you elaborate on this? I may not understand. Can you explain clearer? You have follow-up questions. And make mental notes, or you can put down some notes so that you return to when the interviewer gives the answer. You ask him to elaborate on certain points. Sensitive question you ask in the middle or at the end instead of in the beginning. You ask when the trust is screwed up. You give time for the respondent to reply. And sometimes the interviewee needs time to think about it. You give them time to think about it. Do not try to put words into their mouth. Allow them to speak what they think. And do not assume certain answer. For example, most gay people do not want others to know that they are gay. But some of them would like to have their identity noticed by others because they want to fight for equality. Do not assume that all gay people do not want others to know that they are gay. You need them to tell you their stand. Some non-verbal clues, for example, lack of understanding, embarrassment, you need to notice it. And you sit close to the interviewee with eye contact and you notice the reaction of the interviewee. Typically we record the interview to ask permission from the interviewee whether they allow you to take recorded. Because if you take recorded, you can translate it into English when you do the capstone and can quote certain words to support your argument. So certain words spoken by the interviewee to support your arguments in your report, in your capstone report. That's why usually we take recorded, but you ask permission. For ending the interview, You usually ask a positive question in the end and a completed note. For example, ask question about the future development. For example, you ask about what do you expect the future development of Hong Kong housing. You have to end with a positive note. You take the interviewee and reaffirm confidentiality and explain how the information will be used at the end of the interview. Some useful prompts. When you encourage the interviewee to continue, you can have silence. You can have some kind of nodding to show that you are understanding the interviewee. Or you invite the interviewee to elaborate. You can say, can you tell me a little more about that? What happened after that? What did you feel about that? Stimulating further thought. You may say that some people have said ABC, what are your views? People have whole different views about this. They say X, Y, Z. What do you think? Some people might say ABC, how will you respond to that? Stimulate the interviewer to think. You can use certain prompts like this. Returning to earlier points, can I take you back to something you said earlier? Ask for clarification and elaborate. You said ABC, could you tell me more about this? You said that you felt embarrassed about ABC. What did you feel? Why did you feel embarrassed? Dealing with resident respondent. You encourage the respondent to speak up. There's no right and wrong answer. You can tell me your views. I'm interested in something that comes into your mind. What is in your mind about the issue? Some people have said ABC, what do you think? So as to encourage the interviewee to express views. A topic guide for interview. When you go to the interview, usually you have a topic guide, a flexible topic guide with the key topics and issues to be discussed in the interview. If you have a few interviewers, sometimes you write out the whole question, instead just have a key points, key topics and issues. Write out the whole question if you have more than one interviewer, so as to be more consistent. But the prompts and the follow-up question may be up to the interviewer. The topic guide is the basis for the interview format. And it is up to the interviewer to formulate the question, because it is a guide with key topics and issues. The interviewer can formulate questions, follow up the issues, and use prompts and points to explore further views. It is flexible. And the interviewer can have any order of the question. For example, the interviewee talk about certain matters that is related to the last question. Then the interviewer may respond to ask about the last question first, so as to have a smooth flow of the interview. And then after answering the last question, maybe follow up with other questions. The guides and questionnaires come here. The topic guides, the agenda of the issues is open to development. For example, the interviewee has certain answers that is unexpected and that is related to the research. The interviewer should follow up to ask for more information because there's something that is unexpected. And the agenda is open to development. Not all questions are listed. There are follow-up probes and questions for the interviewer to develop the conversation, the interview with the interviewee. The question wording is formulated in the situation. It may vary. And the order may be flexible. For example, the interviewee talk about the last question. You talk further about the last question. Responses are recorded fully and open. It is up to the interviewee to respond in any way. For questionnaires, the agenda is fixed. You have 10 questions, and the questionnaire it is fixed. All questions are listed in the questionnaire, and the questionnaire is specific, and the wording is specified. You cannot change the wording of the questionnaire. It applies to all respondents of the questionnaire. The question order is fixed for a questionnaire. And you have predetermined categories. You can choose A, B, C, but if your answer is not included in A, B, C, then the questionnaire is not well designed, and there's a problem for the respondent. Then the respondent may quit if it is online questionnaire. Okay, we watch a video on focus group.
Interviews. Focus group interviews are interviews using the same techniques as individual interviews, but with a group of anywhere from 6 to 8 participants at one time in one room. Researchers may choose to use focus group interviews instead of individual interviews because they can interview more participants in the same amount of time, and group discussion can help participants recall information or brainstorm or elaborate more on group members' comments. Something that researchers have to be aware of regarding focus group interviews is groupthink, which is when group culture interferes with an individual's expressions. In other words, the dynamic of a group can make one or more people in the group start to censor and or conform what they say in order to fit in with what the group is saying. They adjust their behavior because of their impressions of other group members. A good way of combating groupthink is to encourage the group before the interview even begins to have a wide variety of thoughts and to not be afraid to go against the grain of what the other group members are saying. This can be encouraged throughout the interview as well by the researcher playing the role of a devil's advocate by changing the direction of one-sided discussions by asking the group to consider and describe other points of view they might have. Another form of qualitative data is in observations. This is when participants and their settings are observed. There are usually 4 different kinds of roles that a researcher can take when gathering observational data. The first is at one extreme, and it's called the complete participant. This is when the researcher hides that they are a researcher and they become a member of the group that they're studying. This is also known as covert observation. For instance, let's say that a researcher is interested in studying the eating habits of college students. They decide that observational data should be part of the study, so they decide to observe college students' eating habits by becoming a college student. They take on the role of a complete participant. They're all the way in there with the participants. So they sign up for college classes, they live in the dorms in order to interact with students and observe their eating habits. The advantage of acting as a complete participant is that the observer effect is avoided. The observer effect, or reactivity, is when participants change their behavior because they know that they're being watched. The disadvantage, or another advantage of being a complete participant, is that there's really interesting data because the group members, the participants, don't know that they're being watched, and the researcher is living with, they're in there, in the field with those participants as a member, and they get to see everything as it usually is. The disadvantage of acting as a complete participant is that the researcher may lack objectivity. They may have these deep relationships with the participants, and they might lose that objective feel when they're looking at their data and making observations. The participants also may feel betrayed if the researcher reveals their role as being a researcher. And there's questionable ethics involved since the group members are being deceived. They don't even know that they're being part of a study. Also, there's a possible disadvantage of the researcher becoming a full member of the group and deciding to not do research anymore. This is when all observations stop and the researcher becomes one of the group members. This is known as going native. The next role is called participant as observer. This is when the researcher is a member of the group being studied, but the role as researcher is made known to the group up front. This is also known as overt observation because the researcher's role is not hidden or covert. They're acting overtly. In the participant as observer role, the researcher is more concerned with participating with the group than making observations. The advantage of this research is that ethics of deception are avoided, the risk of going native is avoided, and that the research is still taking place in the field, in the natural settings of the participants, so it's still good data captured within natural settings. The disadvantage of being participant as observer is that the depth of data may be less objective since the researcher is more concerned with participating with the group, and there may also be an observer effect. The next role is called observer as participant. This is when the researcher takes on more of a role of observer than participant. In this role, the researcher doesn't spend as much time in the field and has briefer interaction with participants. Their role as researcher is also made known to the group up front, so this is overt. The advantage of this research is that, again, ethics of deception are avoided, the risk of going native is avoided, and that the research is still taking place in the field, although not to a greater degree, and the researcher is able to have a greater level of objectivity since they're not building deep relationships with participants. The disadvantages of being an observer as participant is that the depth of data may be lacking since the researcher is not an insider, and there may also be an observer effect. Final role is the complete observer. This is when the researcher is a total observer and has no interaction with participants at all. They don't tell the participants that they're being observed, and the participants don't know that they're being part of research. This is covert observation. Of course, for ethical privacy laws, this type of observational role has to take place in public places. The advantage of this role is that the risk of going native is avoided, and that the research is still taking place in the field, and that the research can have a greater level of objectivity since they're not building those relationships. Also, there's no observer effects. The disadvantages of being observer as being a complete observer is that the depth of data may be lacking since the researcher is not an insider, and that the researcher needs to take into consideration the ethics of deceiving participants. Okay, I'm gonna break this into another chunk, so stay tuned, there'll probably be 1 or 2 more videos.
Okay, the video talks about focus group and observation. These are some of the data collection methods. For focus group, it is in the form of small groups, 4 to 8.
It's also important to note that an overarching limitation of all observational research is the subjectivity of researchers. The researchers could observe something and interpret that however they want.
For focus group, it is in the form of small groups, 4 to 8 participants. There's purposive selection of participants. For example, if you conduct a research on Facebook, how people use Facebook for political engagement, you have a group of older people using Facebook, about 40, and a group of female Facebook users, and a group of social activists, how they use Facebook for political engagement. You have purposive selection of participants for each focus group. Discuss issues related to a specific topic within the group. It is run by a moderator. The duration may be 1 to 1.5 hours, and they meet in one occasion, and it is tape recorded so that you can quote what is said in the focus group in your report. If you decide to use focus group, you need to consider the suitability of the topic for discussion. Is this suitable? For example, if you want to research on elders, for elderly women, they may have difficulty expressing their views in front of a group. If you are working on a research topic related to elders, it may be better to use an in-depth interview rather than focus group. And if there are people who have strong views and diverse views on an issue. For example, in Hong Kong, there are the blue camp and the yellow camp political views, and they are very furious when talking about political views. And if you use focus group to discuss on these type of topic, they may fight each other, okay? And it may not be appropriate. Make sure that the topic is appropriate for focus group. The sample, how the participants are grouped together. For example, if you want to research on how people use Facebook for political engagement, you have a group of social activists to collect views on how they use Facebook for political engagement. And you have a group of people who do not use Facebook for political engagement. You ask about why they do not use Facebook for political engagement, how you group them into different focus groups. There's a group dynamic within the focus group. They may tend to agree on certain views. In this way, you can be a devil's advocate. You said that there may be people of different views. They may think ABC. What do you think? So that they consider different views. Focus group is ideal when the study involves highlighting and exploring diversity and generation of ideas. Different people have different ideas, and in a focus group, they generate new ideas. The subject area, a range of issues to be discussed, so that it is interesting for the group to discuss. Less appropriate if the study involves individual behavior, exploration of individual behavior, private life. If it is individual private life, it is better to have in-depth interview to protect their privacy. No need for them to express their private life in front of a group. If the subject area is sensitive, for example, if you research on gay people, they may not want their identity to be known in the group. It is sensitive. It is better to have in-depth interview rather than focus group. When there are social norms that predominate, for example, gay people, it is better to have in-depth interview. Ideal when the participants have common and shared experience and characteristics, and you can group the participants. If they share certain experience, they may be more willing to talk about it within the group. Less appropriate when the participants have diverse characteristics and views. For example, in Hong Kong, the yellow camp and the blue camp, they do not want to talk or discuss with each other about political views, and they may fight each other about very views. Likely to know each other. If the participants know each other, they may not want to express certain views. So as if your mother is within the group, there may be something you do not want your mother to know. Okay? And that's appropriate when the participants know each other. Diverse geographically. It may take time to travel to a meeting point to conduct a focus group. It may take time and money. And if it is diverse geographically, it is not appropriate for mobility problem. Elders have mobility problem. They may have difficulty traveling long distance. And you as a researcher, you travel to their home to collect views instead of having focus groups. And busy people. For busy people, it is difficult to find a time when all people are available. And in this case, you have in-depth interview rather than focus group. The role of the moderator is to facilitate and to control the discussion, to ensure that the discussion fulfills the research objectives. If it is sidetracking, then you will steer and pace the discussion back to the research topic, and ensure that both sides of the argument are discussed within the focus group. The moderator needs to facilitate and control the group process. encourage full participants. When you notice that one or two participants are silent, you encourage them to speak up. And control dominance. When a few are dominating the conversation, you encourage others to participate. For example, what are your views? Do you agree with them, etc. Ensure that there's a participatory environment. Remain impartial and set ground rules. For example, not to use vulgar language, not to have personal attack in the focus group, etc. Grounded theory. Grounded theory is an inductive approach to generate theory from constant comparing of unfolding observations. When you start the research, there's no theory, and you generate the theory based on the observations. It is different from quantitative research with hypothesis testing. You start with the theory and generate a hypothesis and test through observations. Grounded theory research are different. Inductive principle of grounded theory is that you have data collection in the absence of a hypothesis. You do not start with hypothesis. You collect the data and then determine the key variables. The hypotheses are derived from the data collected, and then there's continual data collection to refine understanding and sharpens data collection. You may not understand it. There's an example later to explain. Bayesian and Strauss said that what has already, if you ground yourself on what has already been learned, you have expectation about the research, and it constrains your imagination about the research topic. They stress that categories and patterns are to emerge from new data, and then after the data collection ended, you review the literature for a comparison. This is what they stress in the research. That means you do not start with literature review, you start with data collection. After data collection, you compare with the literature to see what are the difference, what are the new findings. Okay, an example about grounded theory. You began by interviewing 40 shoppers to ask whether they experience problems in connection with shopping and how they cope with the problems. After the interview of 40 shoppers, you review the interview data. You find out that most common problem was the lack of money in shopping. Then you set up one working hypothesis that the socioeconomic position, that means whether you lack money or not, of shoppers will be associated with how they perceive the problem and sought solution. This is the hypothesis you set up based on the interview data. Then you focus attention on more specific variables in subsequent interviewing. You then focus on students to see whether socioeconomic position, if they do not have money, how they solve the problem when they are doing their shopping. Then you do more interviews based on the hypothesis you set up. You interview other types of shoppers, students. You may find out that students, if they do not have money, then they try to buy less number of times. It may be quite understandable. For example, students usually buy mobile phones. If they do not have money, they do not change the mobile phone so often. They buy less number of times. But you interview some housewives, and those housewives, if they do not have money, they do not buy less number of times because they may be buying necessity food. You cannot go without food. They buy lower quality food, cheaper food, instead of buying less number of times. there are different responses. You interview different group of shoppers. Different type of shoppers are concerned with different kinds of goods. Students concerned with mobile phone, housewives concerned with food, and which in turn affect the problems they face. And then with the data collection from housewives and the students after interview, you have additional hypotheses. And then you develop standard set of questions to ask shoppers. Initially, all questions are open-ended, eventually develop more close-ended items. From data collection, you set up hypotheses, and then more data collection, set up more hypotheses. From more open-ended to close-ended. This is the inductive way to do research based on grounded theory. Another approach to do research. Qualitative data analysis. After doing interview and focus group, you have take record all the interviews and focus group. You need to transcribe the interviews and focus group audio recording and put them into written form, word to word. Even very small minor things, you need to write it down so as to make it more vivid when you quote in the report. And if they stop for a while, you dot to show the waiting time. After transcribing the interview and the focus group, you try to generate themes and sub-themes from the overview data. One theme has certain sub-themes, one theme has certain sub-themes, and you list the recurrent themes from the data you get from the transcript. And then you construct thematic framework and compare the thematic framework with the research question and the topic guide. What is thematic framework? This is an example. For example, number 3, there are different subcategories. Experience of other place. 3.11 circumstances when you have experience of other place. For example, you go abroad to study, or you go to travel, or you go to live with your grandma overseas for a while. 3.12 expectations and comparisons. 3.13 adaptations and coping. If you go to other place, you need to adapt and cope with the new environment. You have a thematic framework like this. National ID, personal national ID, aspect how it's expressed, string. You have a thematic framework. After you have decided the thematic framework, you need to do indexing. Read through the phrase and the sentence of the transcript and apply the thematic framework. Write the index on the reference of the margin. Several themes or sub-themes may be related to a passage. You may not understand it, but let's look at an example to understand. In the transcript, you write, yes, in fact, I was born, stop. You put ... A, even A, you put there, you know, 20 years ago in Barcelona. And then you put the indexing here. This is related to 2.2 and 1.2. You have a thematic framework, like this, 3.11, 3.12. For example, this line is related to 2.21. This line is related to 5.4, 5.41. You do all the indexing. Then you do the sorting. Sort the data under the themes and the sub-themes. Put all the 2.1 together. Put all the 5.41 together. And then regroup and read the data systematically. You set up thematic charts. For the thematic charts, you have a summary of the data with the page and the line reference. Small quotes and researcher's commentary. You may not understand it, but there's an example here. Example of a blank thematic chart. Put all the 3.1 here and interview E number 1, number 2, number 3, and you fill in the blank space. 3.2 respondent 1 is this. And this is a field thematic chart. For example, related to 6.1, the index personal expectation of national identity, respondent dragon, male, German. You have a summary of his fields, not the typical second generation German because of education and grew up in German area. And then you have a reference, line 46 of Dragon's transcript. And a German with Yugoslavia roots and refer to 1.161 to 167 line within the transcript. Related to 6.2, Dragon, strength of personal national ID. You have the summary, you have the line reference, and this is your reflection, your comment, not 100% because of other cultural influence. You have your comments, your reflection. It is in capital letters so that you can distinguish it. You put all 6.1 down here with different interview dragon, media. You have a thematic chart. Then you generate findings, identify dimensions, and group and classify under categories. Read down the entry under the single column. Read down all the 6.1 down. All the 6.1. You read all the 6.1 and try to identify linkage, patterns of association. There may be some explicit reasons given by participants. But sometimes you can infer the underlying logic. For example, certain patterns exist, and there's repeated coexistence of themes. And you use common sense to hunt for the plausible. And you use common sense to explain the association. And you can also use other readings to support your findings. How you find the linkage, it depends on your imagination and your research sense. There's no fixed clue to do it. You generate your research finding, it depends on your sense as a researcher. To explain the possible association and the linkage. You can also generalize the findings if you can draw inference from theory and policy. For example, you can link the findings to a theory and then it gets more generalizable. How to read the research article. When you read the research article, you read the title to know what the research is about. Then read the abstract to have an overview of the research article. Read the introduction to know the purpose of the research. Read the method section to see how the research participants are recruited. The research design, is it well designed? The data collection instrument. The result section. To think whether the conclusions are legitimately drawn. And the discussion session, try to explain the obtained result. And there's also the indication of future research. When you are reading the research article, you evaluate the research article continuously to see what are the strengths and the weaknesses of the study. Every study has weaknesses and strengths, and no study is perfect. There may be room for improvement and suggestion for future research. When you are reading, you try to think constantly and continuously what are the strengths and the weaknesses of the study. When you are reading a research, there are three questions you need to think about. What was the research about? What? How the research is conducted, the methodology. What did the researchers find out? The research findings. You think about whether the research design is reasonable. Last time we have exercise on commenting on research design. Are there inadequacies in the research design? For example, if you research on redevelopment and you go to the street in the redeveloped area to collect their views before and after redevelopment, then the research design may be not very good because those poor people are forced to move out during redevelopment and do not come back after redevelopment. You leave out the poor people and their views are not collected. And the research design may have some views excluded. To think whether the research design is reasonable and whether the conclusions are legitimately drawn. There's a checklist for evaluating qualitative study and quantitative study. You download it from campus and read it very quickly. There's a checklist for evaluating qualitative study and quantitative study. Have I uploaded it? Yeah? You read it now?
No. Read no.
you finished? Yes or no? Have you finished reading? Yes or no? Yes? If yes, these are some of the important points you need to think about when you read the research on qualitative research method or quantitative research method. Refer to the chapters when you are reading qualitative or quantitative research method. Okay, assignment 1. You have formed into groups of 2, your subgroup A, subgroup B, and there are 2 groups with 3 members. Because the whole class is divisible by 4.
还总结他们的关系。
Write the commentary on the research design and methodology. Do not comment on the content. Only comment on the research design and methodology on one of the following research articles. 1 or 2. Diana, Hernandez, or Yao Yong and Chu Chapman. Choose one of them and do not do both. And the commentary, there's a word limit, 1,500 words. There's a suggested outline for the commentary. Refer to this. And the deadline is September 27th, 2021. 2022. Is it 21? Yes, 21. And 2021. Okay? You will start discussing with your groupmates about commentary assignment 1 and submit it to campus when the deadline is reached. Go to campus assignment section. You can submit it through the campus assignment. Any question? Any problem? This is the first assignment because you do not have
有3个人的话，是不是要多写一点？
you need to do a lot of assignment.
咱们3个人一个小组。
The nature is to have for you to have
因为其他课是这样的，
That's why doing
其他课多一个人要多写1个字儿。 对。
You do a lot of practice by doing the assignment and the form to workshop.
我们要问老师，我们3个人要不要？
对，3个人要不要多写一点？
No problem.
要还提交怎么提交？是一般要提交还是只是提交？
这上面
去哪儿提交？
它有个 assignment，
First, where we will obtain new levels of knowledge and awesomeness. Hello, scholars. Today we're going to journey through unobtrusive research. On our journey, we're going to cover content analysis, the process of conducting a content analysis, and the strengths and limitations of content analysis. So, what is unobtrusive research? It's research that does not collect data directly from people. So, we're not going to interact with people whatsoever. And there's a bunch of different types of unobtrusive research, but for this class, we're just going to cover one, and that's content analysis. Content analysis is the study of recorded human communications, such as books, websites, videos, letters, text messages, tweets, and so on. Any type of recorded human communication. Generally, there are 2 types of content analysis. One is a conceptual analysis, which is what we're going to focus on for this class, and that's analyzing the existence and frequency of concepts within human communication. And the other is relational analysis. That's analyzing the relationship of concepts within that human communication. Okay. In content analysis, there are 2 types of content that can be analyzed. Manifest content. This is observable content, content that you can actually look at or hear or see, watch. It's right before your eyes, you can actually observe it. And the other is latent content, and that's the underlying meaning of the manifest content. Okay, let's talk about the process of conducting a content analysis. First, we have to have our research questions, and then we need to operationalize our variables. Just as a refresher, to operationalization or to operationalize our variables. It's the process of defining how a variable can be measured. Okay, next we would create a coding scheme. This is definitions of each of our variables and how we're going to code them within the communication that we're going to look at. So for example, let's say that my research question is, what kind of food is advertised during Saturday morning cartoons to children? Because I'm interested to see, I wonder if fast food is the big food that's advertised, or is it sugary soft drinks or sugary breakfast cereal, whatever. Let's do a content analysis and find out. So we need to operationalize our variables. So within the realm of food being advertised, what kind of, let's define what that is. So within the different types of things that could be shown during those Saturday morning cartoon commercials, we have to define what is fast food. I know that we have it in our head of McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever, but there could be more of a definition of, well, is Subway fast food or is Pizza Hut fast food? We'll have to define that and determine that. Next, based on those definitions, we are creating a coding scheme. So this is fast food, this is how we're defining it. This is sugary beverages, that's how we're defining it, which could include juice, it could include soda. Let's operationalize, let's define sugary foods. How exactly are we defining this so that we can code it? Next, we want to do sampling. Let's determine how many different kinds of data we want and what time frames we want to collect that data. So for this particular example, for our content analysis, the data is television shows. That's the data we want. We're going to look at television shows on Saturday morning cartoons, for example, for children. And now we want to determine what time frames we want to collect the data, the commercials for food that are shown during those cartoons. Okay, so how long do we want to collect this data? Are we going to look every Saturday morning for a year? Or are we going to look at just for a month? What channels should we look at? Maybe we only want to look at 3 different television channels and the shows within those channels. We'll need to determine all of this so that we can sample the data. Next, we want to do coding. So once we've sampled when we're going to collect the data, what channels, and so on and so forth, we're going to look at our coding scheme and we are going to code. So we're going to watch those TV shows. When the commercials come on, we're going to code. We're going to say, is it fast food that's being advertised? Is it sugary soft drinks or sugary cereal? Or maybe it's fruits and veggies, maybe it's milk. Whatever it is, we're just going to code it during that sampling time frame. Then we're going to quantify the codes. So we're doing a conceptual analysis in this example. We're going to look at all the codes we made, and we're going to tally them up. We're going to sum them up and create a summary of what our codes were. And then we get to write about it in our final report. What percent of the commercials were for fast food, what percent were for healthy foods like milk or fruits and veggies, things like that, or sugary soft beverages. And we're just going to give basic descriptive statistics such as summary, averages, what percent were, or what type of commercial. So the strengths of content analysis is that it's unobtrusive. We're not going and collecting data from people. We're just watching TV, or we're looking through newspapers or certain magazines. Whatever it is related to our research question, we're not dealing with people directly. Another strength of that is that it can be low cost. We don't have to pay people to fill out a survey. We don't have to have several researchers. It's pretty low cost. And this also allows for quantitative and qualitative research. Because a lot of content analysis is looking at certain texts like magazines, newspapers, we can take out whole quotes and do qualitative research as well with content analysis. The limitations of content analysis is that it's time consuming. It can take a long time to figure out our coding scheme, go and collect data and code it for however long that takes. Usually takes quite a while. And there can be coding errors, especially with relational analysis, relating how the different codes relate to each other. and different people might code differently. Also, sometimes when people do content analysis, they may not take into context what they're coding. Depending on the magazine or newspaper or whatever it is we're looking at, if we're just looking for certain words within our coding stream, that might not necessarily take into the bigger picture, the context of what's being said. Okay, in conclusion, content analysis is unobtrusive research that's the studying recorded human communications. There's different types of content analysis and different types of content that can be analyzed. Thanks for a great journey, and I'll see you in class.
Okay, we have content analysis, which is unobtrusive research. You do not need to affect the life of human beings. And you analyze the TV commercials, the magazine, the newspaper. It is unobtrusive. It does not affect the human life of the people. For focus group and interviews, you need to have people agree to participate in your research. It affects the life of the people. They need to arrange time to go through. Okay, unobtrusive research, it does not affect human life. These are some of the readings that are related to this lecture, and you can refer to it. Okay, that's the end of this lecture. If you have any question, you can ask me. And if no question, you can leave the classroom and do so.
记住。
Any question?
并没有问问那个三个人的吗？谁上去问的？
定量属于2个4，2个2。